Welcome to episode 158 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes. That's www.7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/158.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. This week on the podcast, it's another guest interview, and my guest today is Vania Phitidis. Vania is a certified Intuitive Eating Counsellor, a certified MB Eat teacher, so that's Mindfulness-Based Eating Awareness Training, and a qualified Self Esteem mentor with the More to Life program. She's been coaching and mentoring people to become more of their authentic selves for over 25 years. She works with a health at every size and weight inclusive approach. She has a BA in psychology and a master's in education for sustainability with a focus on behaviour change. So I've been aware of Vania for a while now. I think I first heard about her through Merritt Boxler's Life Unrestricted podcast. She also posts in different Facebook groups that I'm part of. And I think more recently she posted an article that she'd written that I read, and it kind of just reminded me that I need to ask her to come on the show. She'd been someone I'd thought about for quite a while. And what I discovered when I did reach out is that Vania lives about 20 minutes down the road from me, just a couple of villages over in a place called Forest Row. It's a place I spend a fair bit of time in. There's an amazing farm there where I do some of my shopping. Ramsey goes to school there on a Friday morning. It's a school. He does the parent and child group, so with either Ali or I. So it's a place I know well, and wonderful to find that she lives so close. And actually the day after this goes live, Vania and I are actually going to meet up in person, something that very rarely happens with guests on the show simply for geographical reasons. So yeah, that's nice. And as part of this episode, we chat about Vania's background and her story. So her history with dieting, developing bulimia and overcoming this, and then her long story with dieting after that. We spend a fair bit of time talking about mindfulness. And this is in the broader sense of what mindfulness is as a practice. But we also talk about how it relates to food. And as part of this, we cover meditation, her going on silent retreats. We talk about the acronym RAIN or RAINS. We chat about self-esteem, cognitive behavioural therapy, intuitive eating, and a lot more. This really is quite a wide-ranging conversation. So let's get on with the show. Here is my conversation with Vania Phitidis. Hey Vania, thanks for joining me on the podcast today.
Hi, Chris. I am so honored and thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So I've been reading through your blog, watching videos you've done and other material you can subscribe to on your site in preparation for this conversation. And there's a lot that I want to cover, especially around mindfulness and beliefs and meeting our needs outside of food and many other topics that we're going to hopefully stumble upon. So to start with, are you able to give listeners a bit of background on yourself, like a brief bio of sorts, who you are, what you do, what are areas of specialty or interest?
Yeah. So I'm originally from South Africa. I've been living here in the UK for almost 20 years now and have the fantastic privilege of living right near the Ashdown Forest and absolutely love where we live. So that's just a little bit about my context. I'm an intuitive eating counsellor, and I'm also a mindfulness-based eating awareness teacher. And I've been doing this work for since 2012 officially. So yeah, coming up for around 7 years. And I mean, that's what I do. I help people come to a healthy, robust, resilient, peaceful relationship with food and their bodies. So there's a lot of body image work that needs to go into that. I think it's very difficult to just work with the food without also working with the body image.
I agree.
Yeah, almost impossible. And so that's what I do at the moment. I mean, I've come from a long and checkered past of other meanderings through my life, but I'm not sure if you want the long story about that.
We can delve into that as we go through this, and some of that stuff can come up, because I think it could be interesting to see how that then has helped or informed some of your practices in terms of studying psychology, etc. So we can definitely get into that.
Sure, great.
And so in terms of the things that you're focusing on now, from reading about you, it seems as though these are very much linked to things that happened to you as a child and through your life, and were originally interests of yours that have then been transferred into becoming a business. So do you want to kind of talk about like what food was like in your household growing up and that side of things?
Yes, I'd love to. So as I said, I grew up in South Africa. I actually am of Greek extraction, so very much culturally Greek. And so, food is very important in Greek culture. My mother is a fantastic cook. My grandmother's a fantastic cook. My aunt is a brilliant cook. So I grew up with food being very important and very delicious. And but I also grew up in the 70s, so away from social media, in fact, even away from TV. But diet culture was alive and well, and my mother, right from really the time that I can remember, was on diets. And I've got a sister who's 8 years older than me. So from when I was really quite young, I remember both my mum and my sister being on diets. And that's kind of how I grew up, with this idea that is what women did. Women tried to control their food intake, try to control their bodies. I grew up with the idea that being in a bigger body is a bad thing, and that we should be striving to not be in a bigger body and preferably be in a smaller body. And, alongside this, it's not just my mum and my sister. It's like, what was the culture around us like? And, my husband always says, you always talk about your mum, but you don't actually talk about your dad.
I was thinking the exact same thing. So that was going to be my question.
So I would say my dad is fat phobic, and not he's a very mild-mannered kind of a man, and, is not massively hypercritical, and I never got the sense that I was wrong or, I had to be a certain way from either of my parents. But there would be comments like, when we did get TV and we'd watch Miss World, say, my dad would always make comments, wow, she's got, legs up to her armpits, and wow, look at her, she's very slender. There would always be comments about somebody's appearance, and not always in relation to their body size, but very often in relation to their body size. So it was definitely I got the message that it was an important thing. Without a doubt, I grew up in quite a patriarchal family. I mean, that's the kind of the Greek culture, but my dad is not one of these, stereotypically sexist kind of a man, but that's just was the culture we grew up in, so that's kind of the standard that was set was we shouldn't be in bigger bodies, and the women tried to comply with that. So from a young age, I remember, on the bathroom wall, my mum and my sister would have these charts up in the wall, and they'd have their current weight and their goal weight, and there was the scale in front, and there would be, a blue crayon and a red crayon for, what was the ideal and what was the actual, and, they each had their own, and, so I would just be in this family culture of worrying about weight and focusing on weight and dieting. And so I just took it on from very young. I started to restrict my food probably when I was about 8, and without being told, without anybody criticizing my body or telling me I needed to. It was just something I did because I actually quite idolized both my mother and my sister, and I just did what they did. And so that's kind of what happened for a few years, sort of under the radar. And then when I was, I think, 12 or 13, I had an orthodontic appliance put into my mouth, and it was fixed. And it was to try and open my palate because I had a very strong lisp, and my jaw, my palate was too narrow for my teeth.
Yeah.
And so this thing, it was a quite rudimentary thing, and it was the early 80s. It had a little key, and you had to wind it up every night and sort of try to open up the palate. And it got infected, and I'll spare you the gory details, but basically I lost a lot of weight very, very quickly. And then I started to get compliments from people. Wow, you're looking amazing. Wow, you've lost so much weight. And I was sick as a dog.
Yeah.
I had swollen glands. I was, cold. I was sick. And this went on for a few weeks and eventually got removed. And, I healed from all of that. But it set a trend for me around the importance in our culture around me being thin and trying to maintain that. And of course, you know how it goes. You have, a huge and quick weight loss. Your body will fight back tooth and nail to get you back to homeostasis, what feels right for your own body. And so then I started to try and fight against that, not understanding or realizing any of this, and neither did anybody else around me. It was like it was better that I was as thin as I had been. Everybody around me was encouraging it. So
and with the encouragement, sorry to kind of jump in, but with the encouragement, was that also coming from your mom or sister? Because you said other people, but were they also very complimentary about the change, despite the way that you'd got there?
I don't really remember specifically them. I remember my school friends, my peers. And at that age, that is so important, your validation from the peers. I mean, my parents were suing the orthodontist for malpractice, and, they were very concerned about my health. But
right.
I think they saw health and weight not in the same relationship when it came to that. They weren't thinking, oh, that's really unhealthy that you've lost all that weight.
Yep.
Not that I was in a particularly bigger body anyway, but I wasn't a skinny kid, So I don't remember any particular comments around that from them. But then what happened was I was just desperately trying to fight that. And I would go on these long fasts and it still amazes me that I managed to do this under the radar in my own family. But I would go for like 2 or 3 weeks where I would only eat. I would barely eat anything. I literally mean barely eat anything, and mostly just drink water. And I was at school. Yeah. And then I would go on these massive binges for 2 or 3 months, And then, it kind of went on and off like this, where I was going up and down, and it was really, really, really difficult. And then by the time I was about 16, this kind of went on, maybe not to all of those extremes of these huge, all of the time, these very long fasts, but it was still in there, and I was still going on diets and following what my mum and my sister were doing. And then there was some event that I went to where somebody kind of shared with me in confidence that they had taken care of, and I say this with air quotes, the big meal they just had. And I said, what do you mean? And this person said to me, well, I just threw it up. And I just looked at her and I went, what a good idea.
Gosh.
There's the solution to the problem. It's just like a light had switched on to me that this was a way that I could eat, and I could also control what I was eating. And then that as you can just imagine, went down the route of bulimia, which in the mid-80s, I didn't know. Or the only eating disorder I knew about was anorexia.
Yeah.
And I didn't know there was a thing called bulimia. And it was, it just seemed like a kind of sensible solution to a problem. But what happened was my mental health went downhill. And I didn't really understand why I felt so depressed, so kind of hopeless, so disconnected from everybody around me, from my schoolwork suffered. I just felt so isolated and alone.
And were your family and were your peers, were they picking up on this, that there was this change in you?
My family did notice there was a change in me, but I was very secretive about what I was doing. I mean, even though at the time I thought this was a good idea, I didn't go and tell everybody about it.
Sure.
Right. So there must have been a part of me that knew that this wasn't a normal thing to be doing.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess you're also a teenager, and teenagers go through periods of being not so happy, and there's all of the changes there. So sometimes things like this can be just chalked up to they're a teenager.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that I didn't make the connection either. And then we had some careers advice thing at school, and there was a psychologist who came and he just spoke to us about, psychology as a career. And then he talked about eating disorders and he talked about bulimia. And my hair on my body just stood up. And I thought, oh, my goodness. So I went home that day and I said to my mum, I need to see a psychologist and I want to see this one, because that was the name of the person who, all I knew is he knew about eating disorders, and I kind of put two and two together and realized that this is what was going on. So she just said, okay. So she took me, but it took me about 5 or 6 sessions. I just couldn't get it out of my throat. That I felt so ashamed, I think both ashamed and terrified that if I wasn't doing this, what would I do?
Yeah.
But also recognizing that I couldn't go on like this. It was affecting me terribly and affecting my schoolwork. I mean, not barely, but I kind of scraped through high school. It really did affect me. And so I was scared. But eventually we kind of found a way for him to, kind of almost like ask me 20 questions and I would just say yes or no.
Yeah.
And he would kind of go through a list of things and eventually hit on the right one. And then he said to me, you are in danger. You're a minor. And when at the end of the session, I'm calling your mother in and I need to tell her because that's my duty of care. And I was mortified. I had absolutely no preparation for this conversation with my mother. I think it was pretty badly handled in retrospect. But he was just doing what he needed to do. So I called in my mother and, it was then out in the open. And I just said to her, please don't tell Dad. I will stop. That was all I said. I was just mortified about the whole thing. And she said, okay. And I stopped. And she never told my dad, as far as I know. And I never went back to the psychologist, and I got no further help for that.
Wow.
Which still astounds me, actually, and I can't really remember whether it was, well, do you want to keep going back? I think it was just the mortification for me of my mother knowing and there being this problem, and I didn't want to be a problem. And so I just cold turkey stopped doing the behavior, but carried on with the dieting and the binging and the restricting in other forms, the exercising, just not eating, other ways of compensating that didn't involve throwing up.
And in terms of that work, because you talked about earlier where your mum and your sister would diet together. So at what age were you brought into the fray where, I don't know, the three of you were dieting together, or it was okay for you to be dieting with either your mom or your sister?
I reckon probably when I was about 14, 15, before the bulimia started.
Okay.
I was already following diets with them. I went to dietitians. There's a lot more to the story. I went to a doctor who gave me injections and I've forgotten the name of the medication. It's now banned. So these diet pills that, suppress your appetite but make you go, they're like speed. I couldn't sleep. I was, jittery all the time, dilated pupils,
Is it fen? Am I getting that right?
Yeah, that one. Yeah, that one.
Okay.
Yeah. So, that was sort of in between before the bulimia started. There was also, and then after that, there were more dietitians. And actually, when I was 20, I came to live in the UK, and I was working in the UK. And I gained a lot of weight because I just binged for the whole 2 years, pretty much. I just didn't do any restricting. And when I got home, my dad's comment to me was, "This is no way for a young girl to live. We need to do something about this." With kindness, it was him trying to do the best for me. I don't hold it against him, but, sent me off. We found a dietitian who said to me, "You know what? Just eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. That's all you need to do. Eat whatever you want. Just eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full." And I looked at her like she was from another planet. It's like, what? What are you telling me? You're a dietitian. Give me a diet.
Yeah.
Tell me how many pieces of bread I can have. She said, "If you want bread, have bread. You want cheese, have cheese." And I seriously, when you say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
Well, the student wasn't ready.
And I'm thinking that kind of advice, while I think it could be helpful without all of the other context and out all the other skills to make that work, it's kind of the same as when you say, "Oh, just do moderation to people."
Exactly.
Where you're like, but that doesn't work unless you have all of these other skills in line to make that work. Like moderation or learning to do moderation is a skill. It's not, "Oh, I've heard that phrase, I can now do it."
Yes, exactly. And if I had maybe some education around what the restriction does to you, and that the kind of refeeding after the restriction is just a part of the cycle. It's not that there's something wrong with you. It's not that you don't have willpower. It's literally the other side of the pendulum swing, and it's part of the cycle. It's not a separate thing. I had no understanding of that, and unfortunately, it wasn't explained to me. But yes, it's just so interesting to me that I might have been able to save myself 20 years more suffering if I had been able to somehow bring myself to, following that advice. But as you say, you need a bunch of skills and understanding. You need to be uneducated around certain things and re-educated around certain things, and then learn some skills as well.
Yeah. And so you mentioned about coming out to the UK at that stage. So what was that for?
I was working in the film industry.
Okay.
So I was working in a production company, and so that was what I was doing here.
Okay. And maybe you weren't in the right part of the film industry for this to be a thing, but when I think of the film industry, I also think of the glamorization of sort of thin women or the thin ideal and the pressure to look a certain way. So was that part of what was going on with work? And I know you said it was kind of like a 2-year binge, but was there any part of that was happening as part of that job?
There was no pressure within what I was doing that I should be thin, and there was never any criticism of my body for not being thin, but there was absolutely a culture of, I was dealing with the stars and the actors, and so very much, it's like I did one film in Hungary and had to transport from the UK the actors' dietary requirements, sort of air freight their whatever things were currently they were eating and drinking, and, the particular kind of bottled water and the particular kind of herbal teas and the particular kind of, I don't know, remember what exactly, but, we had to they were very specific about what they would and wouldn't eat and drink and that kind of thing. So that was around, but there was no pressure on me. It was much more, there was a culture of taking drugs that affected me the most.
Okay.
In that arena, it was it really. I mean, not that I got into that. I did experiment, but it wasn't. It not like I got into drugs like that. It just affected me how much people were taking drugs in that industry. That's one of the reasons I got out of it.
Okay, fine. And so what happened when you then came back? You mentioned about seeing that dietitian. How did this then progress once you were back?
Well, actually, I stayed with her, even though I couldn't hear that message and I wanted the diet. She gave me a diet and I stayed with her. And I think it was very, very helpful because I kind of had a framework of trying to be a bit more balanced around food and a bit more, not so scared of different food groups. And that idea of everything can fit, everything can fit. Let's just, find a way for it to fit. But just like any kind of diet, when there's kind of, I took it to the nth degree around, following it to the letter kind of thing, even though that wasn't the message she ever gave me. I think it did help me get into just a bit more balanced relationship with food. But that really didn't last long because I then started to get seduced into this idea that what I put into my body has 100% impact on my health, 100%. And I started to follow, even though this is now in the early 90s in South Africa, sort of early 90s, started to follow certain South African health gurus. And in fact, Patrick Holford from the UK came to South Africa and he was really big there. And so I was really reading all the books and really interested in different things. And I became a vegan and, I know for 100% certainty now that I've taken the time to really get honest with myself that my motivation wasn't 100% health. It was definitely how can I get thinner, thin or thinner, but also, look after my health. How can I do both? And I was 100% convinced that thinner equals healthier.
Yeah.
But I was also 100% convinced that anything I put in my mouth has 100% impact on my health. And so that was a kind of conflation, right, of those two things. And so for probably the next, 15 years, I was following a bunch of different diets masquerading as health. So I was vegan for a while, and then there was paleo and no carb. And, as we sort of go further into the 2000s, sort of following those kinds of trends. But constantly in this, this massive yo-yo, which just didn't stop until I spoke to a friend of mine. I'd been on a very, very restrictive diet where I lost my period. This is 2005. And my very good friend called me from South Africa, and she just said, "I'm desperate. What diet are you doing?" And I just said, "Just don't. Just don't." I said, "I've lost all this weight, and I'm just putting it all on again. I can just see it all, in front of me. It's just like, I'm just swinging to the other side again. Just stop. Don't do it. Don't put yourself through it. It's miserable. Just don't do it." I don't know what made me say that. Yeah. But she went away and just took my advice and started to somehow come upon intuitive eating and other coaches who actually were around weight loss without dieting, but it was the entry point into this kind of work, sort of went through okay, let's lose weight without dieting. And then as we went into that, it was like, okay, let's understand this whole thing about weight loss. Yeah. And, how possible, how real, all of that kind of stuff. And so, honestly, I'm just so grateful to her that she didn't go on another diet, because probably we'd still be in the same boat as we were then. And now we're both both actually doing this kind of work.
Wow.
Which is interesting. Yeah.
And so what was then your journey out of this like?
Well, I read various books. I'm not going to name them because they weren't all that helpful in terms of health at every size, but they were part of my journey out of dieting.
Yeah.
And started to put some of these things into practice for myself. But it was really hard because I was still very attached to, losing weight. And so I found a coach who helped me to some degree, but she was still 1 foot in and 1 foot out of diet culture. And so it was helpful in some ways, but it wasn't all the way for me in terms of really getting to grips with accepting my body the way that it was and really letting go of the weight loss ideal. And really for me, it was doing my own internal work. My meditation practice, I would say my meditation practice was I've had many different fantastic learning opportunities in my life, but my meditation practice, I would say, was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back of the weight loss pursuit or the non-acceptance of my body, I suppose.
Yeah.
And going into greater acceptance of this, and then masses of reading, and then very much immersion into talking to people and listening to various podcasts, and yours included, that have helped to cement the message. But I think once I really understood that weight loss, the pursuit of it is completely counterproductive to peace with food and your body. When I really, that message, it takes time to come to terms with and for it to sink in. And it did, and so I think it's just been a process. It's not like one day I woke up and it's like, oh, right, got it. Okay, fine. Because there's an emotional attachment to being thinner.
Definitely.
You need to let go of that emotional attachment, and it does take work.
And so when you talked about meditation, when did you stumble upon meditation or mindfulness? How did that come about?
Well, I've had experiences of meditation for a long time through this organization that I have learned so much from, called More to Life. It's not about meditation, but included in some of the courses that I've done, there's been meditation. And so I've been exposed to it since I was like 25, but never really had my own practice, and never really got anywhere with it. And it was only in 2009 that I found a meditation teacher, and I just understood something shifted inside of me, that it wasn't about trying to achieve something in the meditation. It was about allowing what was there to be there. And it was just about staying and not bolting, not bolting out of it, which is often what food is, what food can be. It can be a way to bolt out of the present moment. So through this teacher, I learned how to just stay and slowly build the practice of cultivating my ability to be present without having any expectations about how a meditation should be, what the content of the meditation should be. And so that, once I just had this experience, there's only so much one can do with the mind.
Yep.
when you have an experience that's just in the body, that's visceral, that is beyond even the body, then there's something that happens. There's a fundamental shift. The mind can only do so much. There needs to be something else, I think, that happens. Does that make sense?
I'm struggling with that. So explain that more.
Okay. So I think it's in the experience of the being present, of the not doing, of the... You see, when we are practicing in the mindfulness way of meditation, what we are practicing is that we are not the mind, that we are not the feelings, that all of this occurs within the body, but that everything is transient, including the body and the thoughts and the beliefs and the feelings and all of it, and that there is something other than that, that is having the experience of all of that. So they call it metacognition. There's a meta-awareness of all of our experience happening, and that we're not it.
Yep.
So when we are identified, when we're working with the mind, we can often be identified with the mind. And we are more than a mind. There is something more to us than mind. And maybe that's sort of going maybe slightly into the kind of spiritual realm of us being, more than, and that there is more to us or more to the human experience than just our individuality. There is beyond ourselves. I think we can probably all agree to that because we're in relationship with others. We connect with nature. We connect with things that are other than ourselves. So it's about that, also that recognition of there being more to life than just ourselves.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it does. And I think now you explain that more. I mean, I'm a big believer in the fact that you are sort of a witness to what comes into your consciousness. So like thoughts think themselves, feelings arise on their own. And then it's very easy for us to feel like we are thinking our own thoughts, but they are coming of their own accord. I mean, I've done a whole podcast on free will and my beliefs that we don't have the free will that we think that we do have. So yeah, with your explanation, I'm now much more following what you were saying.
But what I was saying earlier was that there's a visceral, for me, there was a visceral experience of that wasn't just a cognitive understanding that I'm not my thoughts, my feelings, whatever. Yeah. There's a visceral experience of the one who is having the experience of the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations of the body, etc.
And with that, I mean, what you're talking about almost, and I don't know, you can tell me if I'm correct here, it's almost like that ego disillusion or kind of dropping away, which I've heard people talk about, in terms of psychedelics and a lot of the research coming up around using psychedelics as ways for treating depression and anxiety and lots of other issues, but also with meditation, but often when people are going on long form silent retreats. So did you was that part of your meditation experience? Have you done silent retreats?
I have. I've done a few, and the most I had the great privilege of spending an afternoon with Lilia Grau. I don't know if you know her.
I do not.
A few weeks ago, and she's from Mexico. She's a mindfulness teacher, and in this work as well. And we talked about this Vipassana retreat, and we've both done it. And she said a friend of hers called it the boot camp, the boot camp of meditation retreats. And I did that one a year and a half ago now, and it was hard. It was 10 days with no reading material, no phones, absolutely no contact with the outside world, absolute silence unless you were talking to one of the kind of staff around something practical to do with, something, food or your needs in some way, or talking to the teachers like in little groups, or you could go and talk to them if you wanted to talk about, something.
Yep.
Then you could make an appointment and go. But other than that, there was no talking for 10 days. And we were up at 4:30 in the morning. First meditation, there was about 10 hours of meditation a day. And it was really tough. It was really, really, really tough, really tiring, very hard on the body.
Yeah.
And it was also joyful in many ways, joyful to just have that quiet.
Yeah.
And that sense of stillness that you can cultivate. It's much harder to cultivate that sense of stillness when there's so much activity and so many distractions around us. It takes quite a lot of commitment, I think, to reduce distractions in everyday life. And it's quite a blessing to have that opportunity to practice and experience life without distractions. And you go through, well, I did, quite a lot of discomfort with that, but also a kind of letting go of the tension around that as well, because that is just, you come to a place of just acceptance that is how it is. Yeah. The only reading material were instructions about what you needed to do when you left the room. That was a sort of laminated thing that I probably read about 100 times. Just for something to read.
And I've had many friends who've gone on sort of longer silent retreats, so 12 days, 14 days, and I've heard people talking about it on podcasts, and it's actually better to go longer than shorter, because the experiences that they've had and that other people have talked about is it's actually the first 5, 6, 7 days which are really the worst, and it's as you get into the latter stages that it then is where it becomes really fruitful. And so if you're like, oh, I don't think I could do 10 days, I'll just do like a long weekend, you're going to just pretty much go through a lot of hell but not get the benefit out of it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I've been on shorter silent retreats, and I've got a lot of value from them as well, but they were different in their structure. So there wasn't 10 hours of sitting, I think it depends on the structure of it. And some silent retreats, you can have reading material. There's just no talking, with people. So I think it probably depends on the structure of it, whether it would be beneficial or not. But I think if there is something like, there's no reading material and there's literally like 10 hours of sitting a day, you do need to go through the eye of the needle. Yeah. And it is about 5 days. For me, it was about 5 days. And then the other side of it was a very, very, very different experience. And, and then the adjustment to coming home and coming back into life is also quite challenging. It takes some time to settle down and to readjust to the level of noise, distraction, complexity, engagement, relationship, all of that takes a bit of time to adjust to. But I think you come back to it with a very different quality of being.
Yeah. And do you think you could have got to that place of mindfulness if you were just doing, a 20-minute practice a day without going on those longer form retreats?
I think, well, I don't know, because I don't have another me that could do it differently. But they're different. This is something that I find with clients. Not all clients really take to or want to embrace the mindfulness aspect of how I work, and don't particularly want to do the practice in that way for themselves. And some of them really do and kind of really take to it and love it, and then want to go on retreats and take it further. And I think there's so much, so far one, if you're wanting to, you see, I think if you're wanting to use it as a means to an end, and your end is very clearly defined, if that's kind of enough for me, then, doing 20 minutes, half an hour a day of a practice will get you so far.
Yeah.
And if you want to really see, wow, how can this really impact my life and the whole quality of all areas of my life in ways I can't even imagine right now, then I would definitely go for taking it more seriously and immersing oneself maybe into going on retreats and doing it that way. But yeah, I think different people just take to different things, don't they?
Definitely. And so then the connection between mindfulness and how that applies to food, and you can talk about this from your own experience, but also with clients. So how did that help with the eating?
For me, the key thing about mindfulness that supported my evolution around my peacemaking with food and my body was about acceptance and non-judgment.
Yeah.
You can have it as a thought in your mind, and you can have it as a practice. And mindfulness is a practice. It's not really about, yes, I know there's a whole, there's masses of teachings. It comes from Buddhist psychology. There is a lot that one can read and understand and learn, but ultimately it's a practice. And the practice is about compassion. It's about joy. It's about curiosity. It's about non-judgment, and ultimately about presence, and really about doing no harm. And those kind of aspects of mindfulness are all practices, right? And I think that is the kind of key thing for me around using mindfulness, is that it is practice-based, and it's a continuous practice. Even when we're not sitting on the cushion, right? Yeah. It translates into our daily living, how we are bringing ourselves to what we are doing, the awareness that we have around what's happening for ourselves as we are talking. Like right now, I'm just sort of having a thought of, am I making any sense? I'm just sort of aware of that thought that's happening as we're talking. So yeah, it's very much a practice. Does that answer?
It does. And so
I've gone off on a tangent.
I'm guessing then, when I'm thinking about your answer and how it could be applicable to one's eating, is that it's noticing, okay, what am I craving? What would feel good to me at the moment? Noticing when you eat a food, how does that leave you feeling? Noticing what thoughts or beliefs or judgments arise when you're eating a certain food or eating in a certain way, and just being able to kind of see what is coming up from that point as a witness, or sort of objectively. Is that on mark?
Yeah, absolutely. And so so it helps us to be aware of our internal cues. Right? It supports our awareness of hunger, of satisfaction, of fullness, of what we might be desiring to have, to eat. So it serves those more practical aspects, I suppose, of decision making around eating, but also any judgments we might be having about the food. You might then become aware that, okay, here's the diet mentality. Here's the diet mentality arising. I'm judging this food. I'm thinking it's good or bad. I'm thinking it's been a bad day. It's been a good day. Having that awareness that these are the thoughts that are coming up helps us to then decide whether or not we are going to believe those things right now, whether they are contributing to our sense of peace, what we want for ourselves, or not. And so whether we're going to follow that or we're not going to follow it. But, what I try to help people do is to just notice that this is what's happening. We don't always have to do something with it. Simply just the noticing, okay, that's a diet mentality thought. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, what am I choosing to do now? What is my choice going to be? Always with the intention to have a choice that is in alignment with what matters most to me. What matters most to me, and that's something we would work with the client, obviously, for them to distill what really, really matters to them. Why are they doing this work? Why are they here? What are they about? What matters most to them?
Yeah.
And then trying to make a decision or take the next step that aligns with that. But before you can do that, you need to have an awareness of, are you hungry? No. Okay. Why do I want to eat? Okay, it's for that reason. Okay, well, you can still decide you want to eat, but at least you know what you're doing. You're not just asleep at the wheel. Yeah.
And I think, because when I think of mindfulness, I put it sort of, and this is a false dichotomy, but at one end of the spectrum, you've got mindfulness, and at the other, you've got cognitive behavioral therapy. And so with mindfulness, it's more of just the acceptance, and these thoughts come up and we can look at them fine, but we just kind of let them go. And with cognitive behavioral therapy, it's more about, okay, how do we challenge those thoughts? How do we create an argument to sort of shoot them down or prove why they're not actually true? Is that fair?
I love that question because it's a thought that I've had myself because I use both.
Okay.
And sort of not all. Overall, I think, wouldn't it be great if we could kind of imagine ourselves sort of covered in oil, and all of the diet mentality thoughts that come along our way, the body image thoughts that come along our way, they just kind of slide off. That's the perfect mindfulness. It's just like, oh yeah, there goes that thing, slide off. And I carry on doing my thing. But we've got to remember that there's strong attachment to certain things. And part of mindfulness is learning how to let go of our attachment to things. And one way that we can let go of our attachment, what I said right in the beginning, is to uneducate, unlearn certain things, relearn certain things. And part of that process is looking sometimes at, in some occasions with some people when it's needed, looking at the thinking and seeing, is that true? Is it helpful? Sometimes it might be true, but is it helpful? Is it going to help me come to a place of peace? Is it going to help me accept my body? Is it going to be in my best interest, or whatever it is, right? And sometimes it's helpful to really look at the thought. So one of the fantastic, brilliant tools that I love using is something called RAINS.
Yep.
Which is something that Tara Brach uses a lot, and she uses it, teaches it a lot. It doesn't come from her originally, but basically, for me, it's an acronym, which is kind of a moment of mindfulness broken down into bits. Should I talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think I've posted one thing about it once on my Facebook page, but I haven't covered it on a podcast, and I personally haven't written about it, but I really like it.
Okay. So it's really just an acronym. It's either RAIN or RAINS. I prefer RAINS, and I'll tell you why. So the first R is recognize, and this is recognizing that something is up, recognizing there's some suffering here. There's some probably emotional pain, like maybe a bad body image moment, or maybe stress around should I eat this or not, or guilt around having eaten something, for example. So it's the recognition that something is up. Then the A is the acceptance. It's like, can I just be with this just now, in this moment? Can I be with this? Just accept this discomfort at this moment. The I is to investigate. Well, we can firstly investigate what's happening in my body. So there might be some physical things happening in your body in relation to food. So maybe hunger, maybe fullness, maybe overfullness. So there might be that. There might be other physical consequences of what you've eaten, like, for some people, bloating, farting, a rash, I don't know what, right? So just those kind of manifestations. But then there's also the investigation of the emotion. So that's happening in the body. What am I feeling emotionally? Angry or guilty or ashamed, whatever it is, like how does that feel in my body? But also in the investigation is what is happening in the mind. I shouldn't have had this. I'm ugly. I'm disgusting, whatever it is. And then when I'm working with clients, it depends on their level of distress. Sometimes we can go straight on to the N, which is non-identification, which is recognizing that this is an experience, these are thoughts, these are feelings that are happening. Remembering their impermanence, they will pass. But sometimes when there's a high level of distress, we look at those thoughts and we just go, is this true? Is it true you're disgusting? Is it true that, this or whatever is going to happen, that you can't show your face in public or whatever it is? So because sometimes that helps the person to let go of some of that distress.
Yep.
And then the S part of it is self-compassion and self-care. Like, what do I need now? What do I need to take care of myself? What would be in my best interest here to kind of take myself forward? If that makes sense.
Yep. And I'm just thinking as well, when with the I, with the investigation, I mean, one of the things that I talk about with clients often is like looking at what are the environmental factors that could be playing into this as well. Because I know earlier on I said like thoughts think themselves, you are a witness, but it's amazing the thoughts that you think when you've got 3 hours sleep versus when you've got a solid 9 hours sleep. Or it's amazing the thoughts that naturally occur when you've not eaten for 8 hours versus you had something 20 minutes ago.
Exactly.
And so starting to look at, okay, well, what could be potentially leading to this? And not all of those things you're going to be able to deal with immediately. Like maybe you are at work and you did get 3 hours sleep and there's nothing you can do about it. But at least there can be an understanding of, okay, this could be potentially why these thoughts are starting to rise up today when they weren't here yesterday.
Yes. Or something else might have happened in their environment, like somebody made a comment about their body, or, they saw a friend's holiday pictures and, saw them in their bikini and they were comparing their body or whatever, you kind of, so those can be other environmental factors that are coming in from the outside that are kind of a bit more cultural rather than things that more related to immediate self-care concerns.
Sure. And I would say, I mean, the examples you gave there were fairly directly around body, but I would say it's equally what I noticed with clients is if you have a focus where your body is the problem, pretty much whatever happens, whatever emotions come up will be filtered through your body. So you get an email at work about something you forgot to do, or you have, I don't know, a difficult conversation with a partner or a colleague or whatever. Those emotions can then easily be channeled through, and not like consciously, this is about my body, but that's how it then is felt.
Yeah.
And so with your clients, is the RAINs or RAIN, is this something you're recommending as a regular practice, like at points at which they're feeling discomfort?
Yes. And, the way that I work is I don't give, not all clients get all the same things.
Yep.
Same. Sort of, it's not a kind of, it's like this is something that arises. We use this, I give it to them. Does that make sense? Rather than, okay, we're going to do this now. Now we do it. Okay, this is what we did. It's so. If any of my clients are listening to this and they haven't done RAINs, don't worry.
Yeah.
And it is a fantastic tool, and it is for me. It's like mindfulness broken down into little steps. Little handy way of going through any kind of moment of suffering. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think for someone who doesn't have a mindfulness practice, they can do this.
Yes.
Like it's like a very easy like gateway drug into mindfulness, or even just being the only part of mindfulness that they're ever exposed to, but they can still use it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And so one of the things you talked about earlier on in terms of how you got into meditation or mindfulness, you made reference to like more to life. So I know on your website you talked about going to like a more to life weekend when you were 25 and this being transformational. And I've never heard of the organization More to Life, so I'm ignorant on that front. So can you talk about like your experience and what happened when you were 25, but what More to Life is about?
Yes. Okay. So I found out about it through my brother, who just called me one day and said, go and do this course. And I said, why? And he said, because it'll change your life. And to be honest, I mean, I've been very privileged in my life. I have, had parents who love each other, are still married, grew up very safe, very privileged in so many ways. Okay, I've had eating disorders and etc. But I've had a lot of privileges. So it's not like my life was terrible. But he just said to me, "It's changed my life. Go." And I said, "How's it changed his life?" So my brother and my older sister are my half siblings, and he said it's changed my relationship with my dad. And knowing the history of that, I went, "Okay, I'm paying attention." So I went, and I had no expectations. I had no knowledge of it. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I just knew if it had helped transform my brother's relationship with his dad, then it was something worth doing. So I went, and it was a Friday night, whole of Saturday, whole of Sunday. And More to Life is it's not a therapy. It is a set of skills that you can learn that can help you get more out of life, really. It helps you understand how the mind works, that our minds, when we are children, our brains are not fully developed, and we take on things that are said to us in a way that they're not really meant, right? So children very often will think, if they get shouted at that they're wrong, they're bad, there's something wrong with them. For different situations might arise where you have a greater or lesser level of taking on of that kind of message.
Yeah.
But when we're kids, we take on things, and in order to keep us safe, that keep our parents taking care of us, we have a need for survival. And in order to survive, not to say that our parents are necessarily abusing us, but this is hardwired into us, we need them to stick around.
Yeah.
And so we will try to do things to please them. I mean, you'll know from your little kid when you smile, and, from when he was a tiny baby, he really understood that is something to repeat, and so you smile back, and then you get into the smiley thing, where he's doing more of it and you're giving him the reinforcement, right?
Yeah.
So as parents, we positively reinforce the things that we want, and then we give disapproval of the things that we don't like. And different parents have greater or lesser skill at doing this with their kids. And so, we take on things as children that turn into beliefs. And we then guide our behavior based on these beliefs. Of course, there are environmental things. There are other people in our lives. There are teachers. There are things that people will tell us. It's not all about our parents. There are things that we just imbibe from the culture as well. We kind of, if you live in a sort of broadly based Christian, culture, you might sort of take on this original sin and guilt message, even if you haven't necessarily, grown up in a religious family, for example. So what More to Life does is help you to be able to quite quickly shift your state of from one of Well, again, it goes on a continuum from discomfort to despair and hopelessness, right? All those kinds of, let's call them negative emotions.
Yeah.
I don't really like that term, but people understand it that way.
Yeah.
What basically it teaches is that, something happens and all of these old messages get triggered, which result in the emotion of, anger or fear or hurt or whatever. So as an example, somebody says, you look terrible in that, and then your mind goes, I'm worthless. I shouldn't be seen like this. Nobody likes me. Nobody's going to love me. I'm unlovable the way that I am. I have to change my body. Get the mess? That's the kind of barrage of messages that come our way. Or maybe somebody doesn't even say you look terrible in that. They might just give you a kind of look, a slightly disapproving look, and then all of that can get triggered. So what More to Life does is help you to quite quickly through a particular way of doing this, accessing what is under the radar of our immediate awareness about what we're thinking, so that you can go, quite deeply into these very core beliefs that we might have about our worthiness, our lovability. And then in the CBT kind of way, you really to look at those thoughts and just, are they actually true? Is that true that this is so? So it helps you to shift your state, out of that into actually you tell the truth. Actually, no, it's not true. I'm not lovable. I know that is true because, people do love me. People do care about me, for example. So that's one of the things, but there are a bunch of different things that helps you let go of resentment. That's big one. That's the one that really changed my brother's life. And take ownership, I suppose, for what we can in our own lives.
Yeah.
And so really what happened for me when I did that course was just a huge awakening of what was about my internal life that I'd had no idea about before. It helped me to get that kind of separation. We talked about that in terms of mindfulness around this whole world that was going on that I wasn't really aware of beneath the surface. And so that really, really changed my life. It taught me, I'd been a people pleaser, and it's been a work in progress, should we say. But it's taught me how to say no when I mean no, say yes when I mean yes, and not to say yes when I mean no, which is what I used to do. Those kinds of things. So really helping us get more out of our experience of life is really what it is. And so I got very involved in the organization and became a Self Esteem mentor and worked in the organization and volunteered in the organization for many, 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 many years, just helping people to learn these skills. And it's funny because I tried to apply it to my relationship with food for a long time, because I was doing this from 25, right, and consistently. And it was only, around 40, 41 that I realized that diet culture was a thing. And so all the skills that I had weren't able to help me, all the skills around my mind. I thought I just got to apply all of this. It's just like if you say no to eating chocolate, then you just commit to saying no, end of story. It's just like manage your mind. What's wrong with you? But it was only really, in understanding the cycle of dieting and, that around diet culture and all of those things that I understood why I couldn't apply mind over matter, with this. It was just impossible to fight your biology.
Yeah.
So, that's no,
that definitely makes sense. And I think if you approach it purely from a psychological standpoint and you forget about physiology, at some point physiology is going to win. and you can use willpower for only so long. So I think, if you're trying to approach it from that place of, well, I've told myself, no, I'm not allowed to have that, and I have standards when I tell myself, no, I'm not going to do that for someone else, so I just apply that to food. Well, yeah, you're right. It's not going to work in the same way. And it's interesting you say that this was for you at like 25, because for me around 25 was probably when I got into reading a lot of self-help and like studied NLP and some of that I now completely disregard and think it is bad advice, but it did open my eyes, I think, to what you were describing at the start of when you were talking about more life in terms of understanding that internal landscape within your mind. And and it's one of those things that once you know, you can't unknow, where you're suddenly like aware of, I've got these thoughts going on in my head all the time, and actually they're not necessarily true, and they're always talking, and just starting to notice those things and notice how the things that you're constantly saying to yourself impact directly on the kinds of beliefs that you have, and how that can be changed by the thoughts or the messages you tell yourself. Like that whole piece, which it sounds like you got out of More to Life, was also really a big realization for me too. And so with the self-esteem, so you said you were a self-esteem mentor, so what did that actually involve?
Well, it's a 6-week course that you teach once a week for a few hours, and basically trying to teach people what some of these skills around being able to access what's going in your mind, being able to verify what's going on in your mind, being able to see how we the things that when we don't do what we say we want to do, or at any other time really in life, how we accuse ourselves of certain things, and then how we behave out of that accusation. So if you believe that you're, useless because you can't stick to the diet, or you can't, keep your weight down, then what do you tell yourself you have to do? You tell yourself you have to try harder, you have to try a different way, you have to, whatever it is. So it's trying to teach people a framework of how the sort of judgments or accusations they have of themselves guide their behavior. And it's a model really that you teach people how to do, and then helping people to look at what actually are the qualities that they do have. What is true about them. It's not true that they are worthless human beings, because is anybody really a worthless human being? And for them to, again, it's a process that takes time to kind of accept, I suppose, because when we believe things for a very long time, we can become very attached to those things being true. Yeah. And it's a way of trying to help people understand what they're believing, and to really look at the veracity of their thoughts, and then to see what actually is true, what is possible, what is true for them, and in that way help them build their esteem of themselves, because it's all there, right? Yeah. People have innate worthiness and lovability. It's not, you don't have to do anything to earn it. There's nothing you need to do to earn your lovability and your worthiness. It is given. It is there. It is the only thing that is standing in our way is our own acceptance, recognition, and ownership of that. So what we try to do is to sort of unpick the things that are in the way of seeing that and coming to that, because that is what true esteem is. There's nothing you need to do, earn. There's no job you need to do. There's no amount of money you need to earn. There's no type of body you need to have. There's no, your children's behavior. It doesn't have anything to do with your esteem. That's all a kind of false sense of self-esteem. That's not true esteem. Yep. So the course is really to help people come to that place. By the way, I haven't taught it for a really long time, so I don't teach it at the moment.
Okay, fine.
But it's part of my makeup.
Yeah. And I mean, what you're describing is a lot of the stuff that I work on with clients as well. And what I find, and you kind of touched on this, is like sometimes there will be conversations or there will be things where you do have aha moments where you make a comment or they do a writing exercise or something happens and then this big chunk just falls away because they notice the cognitive dissonance or there's like this big reveal. But that happens a lot less. And what normally happens is just through repetition, things start to change. Because what I often point out to clients is they'll have moments of talking about, oh, this thing happened to me when I was 7 years old or when I was 14 or whatever, and that really dramatically changed my life. And it's like, was it that incident or was it the fact that you've replayed that incident for the last 2 decades? And so it's then, how do you do that in reverse? It's like starting to talk yourself in a certain way or to replay other events or whatever, but doing that again and again and again. And it's not going to happen overnight because it didn't happen in the other way overnight.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's what I love about the acceptance and commitment therapy model, which is, you have that awareness. Okay, there's that story, right? There's that memory of when I was 7, all the thoughts attached to the memory of when you were 7, probably. Okay, that's here. Where am I putting my attention?
Yep.
Where am I going to invest myself now? It's not you're trying to fight it. You're not trying to make it go away. You're not trying to push it. You're not trying to suppress it. You're not trying to get rid of it. It's just you put your attention on something else that matters to you. And that's how we can rewire our brains, is by not keeping on feeding that wolf of that old memory. But it's not that it might not be something to resolve. You might, need therapy or something to really look at that in greater depth or detail if needed. But sometimes it isn't needed. Sometimes what is needed is, okay, there's that thing. Now what?
Yeah.
What am I doing now? Where am I investing myself?
Yeah, definitely. And so with your story, so you said like you did this at 25. It was then another very long time before you kind of worked it out from a food perspective. And then you started working in this area. So what were you doing in between that time from a career standpoint? Like I know you studied psychology, you then did a master's. So what was going on underneath all of this?
So sort of betwixt and between, I have done so many different things. I have edited educational material, probably around that, first the movie industry, then I got out of that. And then I worked for the More to Life Foundation for a few years in the central office as a manager. So that was amazing because I learned so much. And, just sort of being immersed in this kind of work just gives you so much, and you learn so much outside of the courses, because you're practicing all of those skills with everybody you're speaking to and enrolling people into the courses and, all of that. It was very impactful for me those few years. Then I met my husband and we got married really quickly and had a child very quickly. And I was very fortunate to be able to give myself over to mothering for a little while. But just before that and for a little while after my first child was born, I was involved in editing some educational material. And that was also, again, just building on the skill of being able to write, being able to communicate, being able to be clear about a message. All of that was very valuable to me. And then I had our first child, and a couple of years later, the second child. So I wasn't working in that time, although I was teaching the Self Esteem course, but, here and there kind of thing. And then, but still very involved with More to Life. And then our second child was born, And then we noticed that our first child had some kind of issues and we weren't really sure what. And so there was a need for some exploration around that. And it was suggested to us that she had autism. And so that required, quite a lot of management because there were some behavioral issues with our second child. And I mean, with the older child in relation to the second child. So that required quite a lot from me. And then very soon after that, we decided to come live in the UK. So we had a whole relocation thing, and that took some adjustment. But so for those sort of early years of mothering, I was really, mothering and navigating the world of autism and how do we support our daughter and what does she need? And, doing a lot of reading around that and a lot of soul searching around, at what point do we, this is a conversation I had with my husband a lot. And I think it's helpful to think about, in this conversation, but at what point do we accept her as she is and just let her be, let her be as she is. And where do we try and give her therapies and occupational therapy and perhaps some other things and try diet. We tried the GAPS diet with her, which I deeply regret. For example, what do we try and quote unquote fix?
Yeah.
Because I was still in a fixing mentality and my husband is more evolved than me. He was in a let her be as she is. Let's just not, just let her be. Let's just, we just love her as she is. Let her be as she is. And I think there's some room for us to come together in the middle around that.
Yeah.
But I was, very much still over on the one side of got to try this and got to try that because I wanted life to be easier for her. Life is not welcoming to people who are not neurotypical. And so I wanted her, and so, sort of parallel to that, you can understand why life is not friendly to people in bigger bodies, Of course, people in bigger bodies want to not be in a bigger body because life can be friendlier,
Yeah.
And so sort of similar sort of ideas around that actually we've got to work to change the culture to make it more accepting for everybody. So anyway, I sort of got a sidetrack here, but so then, I got into green politics and became a counsellor so there was a lot that needed to be done along with my daughter. I needed to really fight hard for her to get the kind of education she needed, to get her needs met through the education system here.
Yeah.
And that required tribunals and, just a lot. So that took a lot of my focus. And sort of in between that, I read this book that was just blew my world apart. It was called The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by Thomas More. And I just thought, oh, my word.
I've not heard that book before. So
it's just, it blew me away. And this is from 1999, this book. I read it in around 2000, but it took me a few, we moved to the UK at that time, but it was in my mind all that time that we need to do something about how we are using resources in the world and that the way that we are using resources is not sustainable. And I wanted to do something about it. So at the time I was thinking, do I go and do a nutrition course with Patrick Holford? Because that was sort of in my mind a lot. Or do I try and save the world from, gobbling itself up? It's just like, do I want to save the world or do I want to go down, so, me being at that time, very still attached to my ego and still am, I think, thought, no, I'll go the save the world route. So I looked at, master's programs and I did one on sustainability. And it was really just absolutely fascinating course around just looking very, very broadly around what is sustainability from a personal point of view to a global point of view, about poverty and sustainability, about, economics and sustainability, about our models of education and sustainability. It honestly blew me away, this course. It was just broad and deep. And but in between, I was sort of doing the the child rearing kind of stuff. So, and then I really did try to work in this field, because what I tried to do was bring together what I knew from More to Life around how our minds work and about how we behave based on our intrinsic and our extrinsic values. Some of us behave more along extrinsic values. Some of us behave along, more along intrinsic values. But all of that is dependent on the meanings and the beliefs we're holding to be true in our world, and then our behavior is directed based on what we're believing. And so I wanted to find a way of applying this in businesses to more sustainable models of doing business. So I worked with a consultancy that used this More to Life kind of methodology in business already, but around sustainability. And so I worked with them for a year, really trying to gain some kind of traction into the business world with this model. And for my dissertation, we did an experiment, with using this methodology around helping people to change their behavior. But this is not in business; these were just people, individuals, and it was really amazing. It was a fascinating study, and it did show some really promising results. So we wanted to apply that in the business setting, but this was around the time of the crash in 2008.
Okay.
And all those kind of budgets just went off the radar. And then, I just thought, okay, that's not working. Given everything in my life, I've got a child with special needs. I want to be home-based, What can I do? I was already on this path myself. And so I thought, okay, I can apply everything that I know to this. So I did.
Wow. So that's really interesting to get more of your backstory around that. And one of the things that's coming up is I discovered you live about 20 minutes away from where I live, and you live in a place called Forest Row. And I associate that, and I'm painting with a very broad brush here, but it is very much like this little epicenter for like the green and the sort of alternative kind of worldviews, and so some of the stuff that you kind of touched on there, I'm like, oh, okay, I can understand how you would fit in quite nicely in Forest Row.
Yeah, well, interestingly enough, my reading of this book, The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight, happened before we moved to Forest Row, but it was a perfect fit in so many ways. I mean, we've had a transition town here. It was one of the first bunch of transition towns. I was elected a Green councillor for one term, then I decided not to stand again, and we've just elected one again this cycle. So it's a bit of a sort of green microcosm in quite a big sea of blue around us here, and it's. We've got lots of biodynamic farms, well, 2 particular biodynamic farms in our area that, you can get raw cheese and raw milk, and, you see the animals, it's all just, it's a really fantastic place to live. I'm honestly just so privileged to live here, just to even, walk around and just be able to go to the farm and pick up salad that was picked that morning is just amazing. And I don't take that privilege lightly. I realize it is a very big privilege to have.
Yeah, no, it is. It's a place that I spend a bit of time in, and it is really lovely. And so with then that transition, was it at that point that you then discovered intuitive eating? So when you were like, okay, what do I want to do? How can I bring the stuff that I've done for More to Life into something that I could be doing when I'm working at home? Was that when you discovered intuitive eating?
But, for actually quite a long time, I had been thinking, I'm going to be I'll go and do a nutrition a long time ago. Like before we even left South Africa, I thought that's probably what I would do. So I was already interested in working with people around their relationship with food, but I wasn't thinking at the time this work, because I didn't know about it, it was more, how can I help people, not eat chocolate, because that's what I wanted to do and what I believed was healthy. So always for a long time, I'd had this idea that I would help people in this area the way I wanted to help myself. And then as I read more and learned more, I just went, okay, I got it. This is what I can do. It's not about the nutritional components of food. Not that that's not important, but that's not where I want to go.
Yeah.
This makes sense to me. And so it was at the time where I realized that working in businesses around sustainability wasn't going to be able to happen given other circumstances for me at that time and in the world, that I thought, this is something I can do. And I just had such clarity that it was the right thing for me to be doing. And it just kind of flowed from there. I did the Intuitive Eating Counsellors thing. I went up on the website, as a counselor, and like a week later, I got an email from someone. I went, oh, okay. I get it. Okay, I'm doing this. And so I started to do it. I didn't have a blog. I didn't have anything at the time.
And we talk quite a bit about mindfulness. What do you see as like the overlap between intuitive eating and mindfulness?
It's such an interesting question. I don't know if we've got time for the long answer.
Okay.
But the short answer is they have similarities, but they are very different things.
Okay.
Mindfulness, and I talk about mindful eating as located in mindfulness.
Yep.
I'm not really about it just being a thing on its own, but it can be a thing on its own. People do teach it as a thing on its own. But for me, it's kind of located in something bigger than it. It's a practice of mindfulness, right? So I'll just talk about the mindfulness itself is a practice, and intuitive eating is a set of principles that is not necessarily in a sequenced step kind of way, but it is a set of principles, whereas mindfulness is a practice. And intuitive eating is a way of re-educating yourself. It's a way of unraveling old kind of thinking and learning things about, what diet culture is and what dieting does and, all of that kind of thing. And it involves curiosity, compassion, honoring our bodies, and so does mindfulness, right? They both include doing no harm. They both include honoring all bodies. And they're both weight inclusive. Although I know there are, people who do teach mindful eating as a way to lose weight. But that's not really rooted in mindfulness, because mindfulness in and of itself is about acceptance, and it's about non-striving, and it's about not having a goal to necessarily change anything. So, it is weight inclusive because of that, in my opinion. So does that answer how they are?
Yeah, it does. The other sort of side of that is, do you find it there's any parts where they're at odds, where like mindfulness thinks of things this way, but intuitive thinks of it another way?
Kind of. One of the things that intuitive eating says is, get angry at diet culture. And, mindfulness is not about trying to fuel any kind of feelings or cultivate or generate any kind of feelings. So, that you could say they would be at odds with each other. But I kind of apply mindfulness to the idea. So it's like when you notice the anger, put it in its right place. Don't internalize it on you. Put it towards, it is externalize it, because that's where it's come from. Give it back that way. The challenging of the thoughts, as I explained earlier, I kind of, if you can notice the thoughts and let them go, fantastic. If you are very attached to the thoughts, let's look at the thoughts and let's kind of, really challenge those thoughts and look at what's underneath them and where they come from and what's true and all of that. So So they can be a little bit at odds, but I think there's a lot of they're good bedfellows for each other. They're good companions, and mindfulness absolutely facilitates intuitive eating. I think mindfulness also, if you really go into the practice of mindfulness, you develop we develop a sense of wisdom, a sense of which can start to go more into the more spiritual realm, I think. Whereas intuitive eating doesn't really talk about wisdom. I think maybe also that might be at odds with intuitive eating saying, eat for pleasure, whereas mindful eating might say, let's cultivate wisdom. So it's not always necessarily about pleasure. It's about wisdom. It's just like, what would be wise right now? So it might be 10 o'clock at night, and what would give you pleasure is a bar of chocolate. But if you're cultivating the wisdom, right, you would be going, I want to go to sleep. Is that going to be wise for me right now? Again, it's not cut and dried, right? I mean, you can use the one to modulate the other maybe in a bit, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And I mean, the way that I would be thinking about that, and maybe this isn't what is typically under the banner of intuitive eating, but when I think about intuition, it's like, you can use pleasure as one of the factors that you bring into what I want to eat in that moment. But you can also bring in what are the other things going on in my life? When is the next time I'm going to be able to eat? What else have I got going on today?
Absolutely.
How have I felt the last time I ate that food? So it's not just, because I think that sometimes can be the misunderstanding, or one of the big misunderstandings that people have with intuitive eating is it is solely about what is going to give me the most amazing experience in my mouth right now, and whatever that is, that's what I should eat.
And I think, when I said that, I was just looking at the pure principles, of intuitive eating. And intuitive eating really is about self-care. And sometimes to be self-caring, we would not choose the one thing, even if it would be more pleasurable to eat at the time, right? So it is about having that discernment, and they're not mutually exclusive. I think of mindfulness and intuitive eating as a Venn diagram. They have an overlap, and they meet in the middle, but they have things that are different on in the other parts of the circles. The one is not a subset of the other. Yep.
No, I would agree with you on that. So look, Vania, this has been a wonderful conversation. We have got through a lot. Where can people be going if they want to be finding out more information about you?
They can go to my website, which is www.peacefuleating.co.uk, and I have a free peaceful eating guide, little mini ebook on there. I've got a short course called What to Pack for Your Peaceful Eating Journey, which gives little helpful tips about things that you can do to reduce your exposure to diet culture pretty quickly. And I have a free Facebook group called It's Not About the Weight. But everything's available going via my website, including my social media links. I'm not massively active on social media. It's not my favorite place to be. But I do have a presence.
Okay, cool. And I'd suggest people check out your website. As I said, I went through a lot of stuff in prep for this. The video series that you have is great. I know there's different handouts that you have as part of that in terms of like understanding beliefs and understanding how to meet your needs outside of food, which I found to be really helpful. So please go and check out Vania's website. And thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Chris. I've really, really enjoyed the time together.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7, health.com.